So as you can see, I've got a great, what do you call it, spectrum of my panelists here this morning. So maybe I'll jump straight into it. And I'm going to move this question to ladies first. So Yan Fong, technology is often discussed in the context of improving efficiency, right, and quality of service. Question that's supposed to you is that, are there opportunities to use technology to strengthen governance processes?
Thank you, Irving. Yeah, I think while most people think of digital technology as in helping to improve productivity and efficiency, actually what is not often discussed is how it helps to strengthen governance practices and in managing risks, whether be it the financial, compliance, or operational risk. I think as you mentioned earlier in the presentation, people is the weakest link. And this is where systems digitization could help. So organizations can have systems and processes, but if you have automated these processes and have policies built in or configured into the IT solution, and once this is digitalized, it is less dependent on people, and and it will help to reduce human mistakes and enable consistency and compliance to policies. And in a lot of the systems, you find that there are regular reports that can be generated. With these reports, charities can help make better assessment of their situations, or operational situations, or financial situations, and thereby make timely decisions. And I think the other last point I have is that you can actually inbuild some of this compliance to regulations and legislation into systems. And for example, you can, in your accounting package, you can actually program it such that you can extract necessary data to generate reports, and that could potentially ease charities' annual submission that's required. For example, the online financial summary to COC.
Thank you, Yan Fong. So I think that's quite comprehensive. I'm going to bring James in here now from Touch community to share his views on this question as well. James.
Okay, thank you, Irving. And basically, I just want to cover 2 points in relation to strengthening the governance practices using technology. Touch went on a organization development kind of initiative that NCSS and Tote Board funded. And amongst several of our outcomes, of course, they are primarily in talent and tech. But on the area of tech, we wanted to look at improving the accountability, transparency, and data integrity. As an organization, we have 21 services, and we serve almost from the children all the way to the seniors. And sometimes some of our beneficiaries utilize more than one services. So across the 21 services, they do collate data. And I think it's important that we have this single source of truth, which we coin it, right? As in not having duplicate data sets lying around in various formats, be it hard, soft copy, but just having it consolidated, right? As we use our technology and digital systems, so that we do not have duplicate and we don't have missing data or data that's not correct. Second, we also, through using the technology, streamline our workflows. In the whole process of digitalization, we streamline our workflows, and therefore tech is very key in terms of enabling us to strengthen our transparency and data integrity. So another thing that we did in terms of collating data is to ensure that we give the right access, user access, edits, approvals to different of our staff, so that they can use the data, or they can have access to certain data only if it's related directly to their work. So internally, we need to put a process, but technology does help us in a very big way. Second, in the area of using technology to achieve a higher level of cybersecurity. And we know that with the pandemic, actually a lot of organizations have actually move into digital transformation. They have moved into using technology in a much bigger way for their work. And I think it's very key that we actually look at strengthening our network infrastructure, our cloud, our web applications, and so forth. But I think Irving made a very important point just now to say that actually the weakest link is actually in people. So apart from investing in cybersecurity and just strengthening your network systems, I think the other thing we got to look at is the staff training and helping them to recognize that they can play a very key role in raising the level of cybersecurity in the firm. Yeah, so those are my two key points I want to share.
Thank you, James. I think you brought out an interesting point, because my next question I was going to throw to Bruce. I'm sure he's seen many. It's really the savings, and I suppose from the digitalization that you mentioned, that you not only strengthen internal process, corporate governance, but also the ability to obviously make your process more effective and efficient, and lowering the cost of your internal activities as well. Can you share, perhaps, before I ask Bruce from his perspective, because he would have seen many across this sector, what were the savings that you saw at Touch Community with the digitalization that you've just undergone?
Okay, we are currently still in the journey, right, of the digital transformation. In fact, we are doing our testing, right, our user acceptance testing and so forth. But apart from cost savings and cost avoidance, I think the other thing that we need to recognize in the sector is that we have to go beyond that. We do want to look at how, in the course of digitization, how do we therefore reskill our staff into different roles. So I took a bit of a different track apart from just looking at cost savings and cost avoidance, because we automate these processes. How many roles or jobs will therefore be displaced in the course of it. But because of the nature of the sector, we need to actually look at other KPIs apart from just cost savings. So that's what I thought is very important. If not, we may just swing to the whole notion about how many man hours we save, which is important, how much dollars we save, which is very important. But we miss a very important point, which is on talent, which I think we kind of just covered earlier on in terms of, I think, the earlier panel.
I think, James, you made a good point that I think when we talk about digitalization, most people will jump to the conclusion that we're trying to save headcount, but not necessarily the case, because in the slides that I showed earlier, you could be wanting to improve customer experience.
Exactly.
Digitalization. Bruce, maybe over to you.
Yeah, I actually echo what you and James just said, right, about making use of this opportunity. And as we build resilience with technology and all that, of course, there are cost savings and all that. But, alluding to what you said before about business continuity framework, it also allows charities to have the little bit of buffer they need when, in times of crisis, a bit related like just now, right? You need somebody on standby, somebody else that can come in if you couldn't come back, due to technical problems. So likewise with tech, charities can do that. I thought I also want to just highlight something that James brought up is when we come to risk mitigation, all that here, I think we tend to think about corporate governance, but I think we also need to consider from the user's perspective, the clients, the users and their whole journey, the data they park with us, the services they tap on us, to build that trust. Certainly, your technology has to be resilient, right? Especially as more charities pivot to digital platforms, those platforms need to be credible, need to be secured, and of course, have the right uptimes, right? If something happens, and that will actually bar clients or service users from accessing the much needed services or counseling or whatever that they need. In fact, yeah.
On your point, Bruce, I can't tell you which service provider I used then. Obviously, it wasn't very effective for me this morning. I wanted to bring Prof in, my good friend here, and Prof, maybe one for you, and this is a question coming from Raj Kumar, and I'm starting to look at the questions. It's coming in quite fast and furious, and perhaps this is one, Prof, on at the board level in your capacity as a board member on various charities or IPCs per se. It's a good question from Raj, is how much time should one devote to risk management at internal BU and board meetings is the question.
Thank you very much. In fact, I must say as an introduction that being a board member of a charity and IPC has become extremely complicated. In fact, one of my greatest fear is the fact that very capable people will shy away from this sector because of the amount of responsibility and risk that we undertake. I have to say that at the board level, you see, in terms of risk, the challenge is the fact that we need to have an understanding that risk is abound, right? The world has changed. In the good old days, when we run the charity, life goes on, right? We clobber whatever we have internally, but today with social media, in terms of the bigger risk impact on our stakeholders, publicity, even the livelihood of the entire charity, I think at the board level, at the management level, we really need to take this seriously, right? And the good question lies in how much time do we need to spend? I think it is always good in every board meeting for us, or at least once every 6 months or once every board meeting, at least for the management to flash what are the risks that the charity is facing, whether there are new risks that came onto the horizon where we ought to pay attention to. But the most important thing is actually to create a culture at the board level, a culture at the management level, that every day we'll be dealing with risks. So we need to be aware of that and run our operations, our decisions, our actions with a risk in mind. I think once we do that, then it becomes risk resilient. Right? So at the board level, the board has full faith and confidence that when management are running the operations, right, they always have the risk mitigation in mind. So let me give you a simplest example, right? Singapore is a very safe place. We never need to worry about power failure, right? But if you run a healthcare institution where power is a significant issue, if you have a power failure, people may die. I remember once in hospice that I served on, someone hit the power cable. For a short moment, we don't have power, right? So what do you then do? You may say that, oh, such thing may not happen, you know. I agree with you. We cannot worry about all things under the sun. We take the maxim very clearly, in God we trust, you know. But all else, we work hard to prepare and mitigate, right? So I think that's where the board and the management has to work together. Look at our operations, look at the way we do things, and as a first exercise, flash out the big risks that we have, and then do a continuous monitoring. Right?
I will bring Bruce back into this, and then James, and then I'll come back to Yuan Fong slightly with another question later. There's always this tension between the board and management. The board, I think to Prof's point, is that, you know, board will find an increasingly amount of spotlight on their duties as a board member, and of course they will, you know, I call the word tekan a bit harder, right, to management to say, hey, do this, do that, do more. There's always this tension, I feel, and sometimes I sit in between that two tension. Perhaps a question, maybe Bruce, for yourself first, and you must have seen this from others as well, but perhaps from your experience, how do you manage the number one, pressures from the board, and number two, to be pragmatic and realistic in this risk management journey?
Okay, so yes, you're absolutely right. So the board's expectations may be quite different from what the management may be prepared at sometimes to surface up. And I think what tends to help is, and you can imagine charities come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are more experienced than others. You know, some of them even hail from the private sector, so they have experience like yourself, right? I thought what is useful is, you know, when sector leads like ourselves or MCCY for that matter, right, churn out guides, conduct sessions like this, like today, or workshops and all that. That will help gear the management up to present a case to their boards, such that it assures the board that risks are being taken care of. So when we talk about technology risk, right? Certainly, you know, where do we start? And do I outsource? And there's questions coming out. How do I outsource? I do have internal IT talent to manage any of this risk. What do I do? So clearly there are resources available. There's funding, there's support and all that. And I think MCCY and NCSS, we are doing our best to try and support charities in these areas. And just to sell my Koyo a little bit, I think the Tech and Go Hub, it's probably the first place that you start looking at.
Thank you, Bruce. James, any thoughts on that front, on the managing the top and the bottom?
I think as a head of the organization, I like to see that the board and the executive management are partners. They are partners and not so much as a police kind of policing role. So that's the first thing. And generally, the board does provide the oversight, right? But the executive risk owners are the one that's just ensuring that the risks are mitigated. And at least for us, if you ask a question, I think one of our participants asked a question: how much time should be given? Actually, it's dependent on a few things. Number one, if there is a heightened risk, I mean, like the pandemic, obviously the board's involvement is a lot more. Second, it's also dependent on the experience of the management team. And I think that's key. If the management team does need a lot more hand-holding, I think the board needs to come in. But the third area where you could bring in expertise is, of course, engaging people like KPMG in the whole process, right? So we use a variety of things depending on the journey where we are in over the years and what will make it work so that the organization continue to be able to serve our constituents and be sustainable. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe Prof, one for you, and then I go to Yuan Fong. The challenge for corporates is the availability of resources and skill sets. So as we talk about risk management, and I'll ask Yuan Fong the question on the same question, but on the IT side, how do corporates or how do boards expect that, I suppose, the tension of not having enough money or the right people to want to join, but yet having to fulfill the obligations on the corporate governance side? And then the same question for Yuan Fong on, when you go for IT implementation, the same thing. I think James alluded to, what do you call it, outsourcing some of this. I would like to hear your thoughts on that. But Prof, maybe over to you first.
So my short answer is that it is almost impossible, unless you're a large charity. I think this is to be realistic, right? In that sense, that you see, to do this adequately in the changing world with IT alert and also cybersecurity, I think you need both at the board level to have good people who are knowledgeable, and you need to have management who are knowledgeable, and then from the management who is able to hire capable staff, right? And in the world where IT specialists are in such a short supply, I think the charity is probably the lowest of the hierarchy in terms of getting good people. So I'm not that I'm pessimistic. My thought pattern is it's going to be very, very difficult, right? So in that sense, that's why when we have board members who are very IT savvy, who's willing to lend their helping hand, we deeply appreciate that. But however, this is also lies where the problem is. The board member doesn't want to dabble into IT operations, right? So you still have to fall back on management, you see. And unfortunately, many of the management will say, we expect a lot from the management. We expect them to run humanitarian operations, HR, facilities. Now we need them to deal with the entire suite of IT, right? So I would like to fall back on the thought pattern there. I think this is where charity really need help, right? We need to create a network where we don't have to procure our own IT personnel and IT services. I don't think we can, right? I think we look forward to maybe the various agencies to create these IT setup to help us. Some of them are very simple, like helping charity to migrate to cloud, all right, cloud server. These are very simple things, but I think we need to hold their hands systematically.
Thanks, Paul. We'll come back on the point on shared services shortly, but maybe Yuan Fong, I wanted to hear your views on resources on the IT front, whom you've been working with in this particular sector. Obviously, it's becoming increasingly important, but also increasingly challenging as well.
Yes, I think in our last 3 years experience, we have actually encountered different kinds of charities. The very small ones with 2 to 5 men, and the larger ones, a number of hundreds of staff. I think in each of these cases that we encountered, IT resources is never enough. In a lot of them, IT resources is not even there. Some of them do outsource, but they don't get very good services, or it's very hard to catch hold of the IT support to come and help them. So we see that charities are really in need of IT help. And I think this is exactly why iShine Cloud is set up. It is set up to actually provide that secure platform, because we see cybersecurity as a very important area to look into. And hence the solution that we are offering is a secure platform. Even your end user devices could be, in fact, is the key part where hackers would come in. But we want to take that away up to the cloud, so that even if your system, your hardware gets into a situation with cybersecurity issues, your data and your solutions are still safe in the cloud. So we provide that way for charities to get into the cloud solution safely and look into the various cybersecurity issues that it's going to be very hard for charities to look at, but we have a team of IT personnel who help us to look into this issue. And having it as a shared services help to sort of defray the cost across different organizations. Imagine if you are a 5 to 10 people strong charity, it's going to be hard to have even a one headcount just looking at this. And the one single headcount is not able to look into the various aspects that's needed to manage the IT system, to handle the cybersecurity risk. So we really need, a common solution, a shared services, so that aspect of cybersecurity can be taken into consideration and managed well. So we are here to help, actually. There are a lot of costs, and we hope to also have sponsorship and so on to help defray some of these costs across different charities. Yeah.
Thanks, Chen-Fong. It sounds like, with the size of some of this, that a lot of you actually rely on volunteers as well. But again, if you think about COVID, even the volunteers stopped coming at some point in time, right? Because of the current situation. I go back to, again, the default on, technology and how, James, what you have shared with us earlier. But Bruce, not to put you on the spot, there's some questions on, I suppose I wanted your views on shared services, number one, and there's some questions on funding, or obviously how some of their organizations can tap into their funding, in particular VCF, to get the money out to help them in their particular sector in these trying times. So some comments and some views from you, Bruce.
Okay, so yes, so the concept or philosophy of funding has changed somewhat over the years as well. I think initially when we first started funding, particularly for technology, right, it was like a capex funding for the first year, because we tend to think that technology is very heavy investment on first year, and then subsequently not so much. But as more and more services move onto the cloud and it becomes subscription based, right, we recognize that actually the cost is spread out. So one of the things that we have changed over the past year was to give a longer term support, albeit on a scaled down basis, but this gives a longer runway for charities and SSAs, right, to gear up, be it their own internal capabilities or other systems that they have in mind, right, they want to build. So that's one thing. We've also cut short the process. So, previously, in some of the applications requires free codes and all that. So one of the changes we rolled out or introduced is really to have like a green lane pre-scope. If certain vendors or solution providers are already pre-scoped, they are deemed to be credible, their price is deemed to be reasonable. There's just a straight through processing without needing to ask for free codes, as long as from the pre-approved list. So these are some things we are working towards. The other thing, I also recognize what Prof said and everybody else is saying that about IT talent, right, as a very scarce resource. And this is not just for our sector, it is for every other sector. So there is plans and working with ToadBot, and they are supporting in terms of funding. So we're working with ToadBot to pull together specific IT talents, cloud them to the smaller charities, so that they can do some form of like in a gig work kind of way, ad hoc, on demand basis kind of way. So hopefully that might also help resource the sector adequately.
Well, that sounds like a good development, Bruce, and I'm sure a lot of people are very happy to hear that. I'm going to just make a few comments from questions that are being asked by the floor. I think Christine mentioned, Prof, with the increasing a good point, right? Whilst we are talking about technology, digitalization here, charities, a lot of it is about the human touch, right? I think when we sort of digitalize, I think there are really 2 points, as I make mention. One is the front end and the back end. The back end, perhaps, the donors don't see so much. But maybe, James, your thought, because obviously it sounds like, Touch have gone through that process. The point that's being made by both Christine and Dinesh is that, yeah, whilst we're trying to do all this because of pressure, but again, to me, I'm also looking for that human touch. When I donate money, I want to make sure that it's for the right cause, for the right people, and even the right people asking me for money makes a difference, right? Not through a unsolicited email to ask me for donation. Makes a whole world of difference.
Yeah. So on the point about just using the example as fundraising, I mean, we obviously try to automate the process, and I think it's been helpful because if you look at the way charities do fundraising, it's a lot of face-to-face kind of engagement, and that's where they get the money. But with the pandemic, obviously it doesn't happen. There's literally no events. The last 2 years, people are hit very badly. Charities are barely trying to survive. And so we migrated to the online platform. I think it's 2017, we started the process. And actually with the pandemic, it kind of, we were spared the massive impact in terms of donations. But at the same time, you're right to say that you actually need to follow through, not just with a robot, but we do have people following up with a call, engaging them through online platforms to keep them updated. But calls are important. Fundamentally, we are a people sector, we are a social service agency, and people still like the idea of having a connection, be it face-to-face or over the phone. Right? So I think it's important. You can't swing from one end to the other. In as much as we offer a hybrid platform for engagement, for service delivery, you give people choice. People are good to choose. But if you were to move from one end to the other, I think we will be asking for trouble.
I think, James, interesting point, you talk about choice. People do and have said that actually there are many charities around, many duplicative charities around as well. And sometimes people are confused with respect to who they should be giving money to. And I think this is where the bigger ones, perhaps with a better history legacy, are able to attract better donors because of its maybe stronger corporate governance, more established track record. But perhaps, and I know for a fact that, some of the smaller ones are doing really good work, but not able to get the attention as well as the funds to do this. Aloysius made a very good point here on his comment to say that, in the corporate world, there's a lot of M&A. I suppose the question is that, is there appetite for charities to also look at potential mergers? And I know it's slightly different because, the individual is the one who sets up the charity, meaning to do well, is the whole basis of that charity itself, which is different to a corporate organization that sells products or services, right? It's always an individual, the personality, and what the person sets up the charity is for. But interesting concept, I may say, that Aloysius has brought up. Prof, any thoughts on that? On consolidation of duplicative charities and causes alike. And again, Singapore is a very small place, right? We can't, I think, in my view, as Prof knows, even in the accounting world, we're trying to consolidate the smaller firms.
I'm not sure you like my answer as it is. I think there are some smaller charity, there are not a lot of reasons to exist, right? In the sense that because their services overlap with others. So I fully understand the fact that many helping hands is a great way of doing the work, but the fragmentation in the market is very severe. So, I mean, one small charity have 5 boards, another small charity have 5 boards, another small charity have 5 boards, and 3 of them serve in the same space or overlapping services. I think that consolidation will help very much. However, unfortunately, is that many of charities are driven by very passionate people, and we all know passionate people are very hard to work together with and work alongside each other. So I think this is where the smaller charity runs into challenges. But nonetheless, I'm positive over the fact that I think we can create platforms where the smaller charity can come together to collaborate. There may not be a merger per se that where one will disappear, but I think we can form alliances. Right? We can form groups. I mean, where I always have this joke, we can form associations, right? For example, the lead finance manager of the smaller charity can come together to form an association, right? Where they help each other, how to navigate over the rulings, the fundings, and how to share resources, tips, and hints. I would rather see that. I think that is probably one way we can deal with it. To eliminate the small charity, I guess we always need to let the free market play its role, right? Play its role. Right?
Okay, Prof always gives his candid opinion, which is great. Bruce, your views, because obviously in this sector itself, yeah, and you.
Well, Irving, you are really putting me on the spot. I hope my board members are not listening because I don't speak, on their behalf. But I like what Prof said about forming alliances and all that, and that's what we try to do. And it is not just with the smaller charities. I think the bigger charities can also play a part, in this ecosystem. Touch is a good example. Not just because James is here. But yeah, they have been a trailblazer, a forerunner in some of the technology they've adopted. And clearly they're stepping forward. They want to do more. At the same time, they want to bring others along. So for very similar use cases or services, right, that tap on new tech, be it AI, chatbots like that, they can share the experience, take a lead, so that even if the small charities, right, they want to continue their services, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They don't need to invest in so much energy and time with the tech that Touch has invested, for example, and they can leverage from there and still provide that service for their users, and better, still more efficiently and more effectively than before. So that's what I hope will happen. And then just to quote Prof again, then let market forces decide and see what happens from there.
Yeah. Okay, great. I always like this sort of discussion, which is slightly a lot more contentious. But I suppose just in the last 5, 6, 7 minutes, just to finish off, I would like this question from Debbie, because this forum and sessions about risk management. So Debbie's question is really that, about, and taking a point that, I tried to make earlier and thinking outside the box. And the question that comes to mind is that, how can we better prepare for black swan events, right? So I would say COVID, is most definitely a black swan event. Is the one in 100 years. This is compared to the Spanish flu in the 1930s, where close to, I think, 1 million people died actually. And I don't think anyone in their living memory today would have seen this coming. I remember saying last year that, this time this year, this will get better, but we're in a worse situation than last year. So, this might be what we call the new normal. I mean, I myself, being a risk practitioner, I'm not quite sure how also to answer this question. And perhaps in the last, like I said, few minutes, if I can go around the board to, perhaps Prof, I'll start with you at the board level, then we'll go to James, Bruce, and then to Yuan Fong, just to give us your last minute thoughts on, how to look forward with such future events, and how maybe from your capacity as a board member, you would guide management to do this. And then James, from your side, how would you signpost this to your board? And Bruce, from your side, as I suppose the stakeholder group, how would you help others in this sector? And then maybe from your side and more your own experience, any thoughts there as well?
Right. Let me start. I think the mere fact that we're having this conversation and still alive in this COVID-19 is actually a very clear proof of the human resilience. I think at the end of the day, come what may, right? Human resilience, we will overcome. So maybe I can give 2 possible thoughts. One thought is, I use the same phrase again. For any black swan event, I think in God we trust, and all else we work hard to prepare or mitigate. We can't anticipate all black swan. If we divert our resources to anticipate black swan, we waste our time and the precious resources on the normal. So I think we will just have to get on the business as usual with a clear line of sight to prepare and to mitigate. And of course, the last question, thing I always say to reinforce human resilience is this. I like to use a Chinese proverb that says, things are dead, but human beings are alive. 东西是死的，人是活的. And I think we were done the truth, all right? And I think we just have to continuously emphasize on our human resilience, human innovations. Come what black swan, life goes on. Right.
But Prof, to your point, I suppose, on the preparation, before I get James to come on, no matter how much you prepare, as we did for this, right? We did a pre-trial run, and my system still died on me, right? So no matter how much you prepare, I think we or all of us have to always plan for eventualities that may occur, and how do we adapt to be more resilient. So James,
humanly, you have a friend to step in immediately, right?
I know. I was furiously texting all of you, so please take over. All right, James, last
Okay.
words from you. Yeah.
Okay, so I agree, Prof. Actually, there's no way you can prepare for black swan. So that's the truth. I think it's important on a daily or regular basis. There are two things that can be done. One is, if you have a ERM framework, and we do have one, okay, it's to, as we review our processes across the direct service and the corporate services, we seek to not just improve on it, but to try to our level best to anticipate what are the other things that potentially could come up. So that's something we can do, humanly we can do. The other thing that's important in a time of black swan is actually the team spirit and one team. So it really boils down to core values. And one of the things that really kept our team together during this time to be able to turn around pretty fast in terms of getting the services back to the ground, to the people who need it, is really the team spirit. And I think without that, we probably would be crippled in many ways. So that's, while it may sound very motherhood, but this is what it is. And I wish we could give another framework to anticipate black swan, but the truth is it's not possible.
Thank you, James. I think I like your point on the human resiliency at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, it is people that run the organization, not machines.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bruce, over to you for your last words.
All right, I just maybe like to encourage and remind charities, right, to think about the users. Whatever we do, right, all the frameworks that we want to adopt for ERM and all that, right, and what Irving has shared earlier, you do that. I mean, it's not just to answer to your board, right? It's really to ensure that your services continue to be available to your users who will need them even more during times of crisis. So I hope that really, you take the heat, from either James or Prof or Irving, to really drive through some of these changes internally as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. Yuan Fong, last but not least, last words from our only lady here.
Hey, thanks, Irving. I think in any black swan event or any, we can never anticipate. But I think one thing to take comfort is that we are not alone. We will have to learn how to adapt and to collaborate with each other. And I think I like the point about that Bruce mentioned. I mean, we think of the users. I think for charities, it will be what is the purpose of your organization and how you're going to survive, to help and to help your beneficiaries even through this black swan event. I think that's all I have.
Okay, look, before I pass over to Mark, I just wanted to thank my panelists. On behalf of my panelists, thank you also to the audience for sitting through and also to witness at firsthand a crisis that we had to obviously overcome very quickly. But I think to make the point is that crisis can happen anytime, even for us in this event. And the topic of this discussion of resiliency is important because, as Prof mentioned, they were all ready to jump in to cover. And that's real, and that's a reality that we live in today. We live in a very uncertain world. We live in a world that will keep evolving. But I'm confident, as all my panel members have said, the resiliency and the heart in which all of you in this particular sector exists is testament to the human race per se, in terms of how I think we'll continue, irregardless of what happens. So on that note, thank you very much to my panel members. Thank you for such being a great audience, and apologies that we cannot finish all the great questions. We had a plan, but it became off-road very quickly with the questions coming fast and furious.